Phronesis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am Scott Allen, and thanks to my daughter Kate for developing the intro to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast, where we offer a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests help us explore timely topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. If you haven't done so, please click subscribe so you automatically, seamlessly stay in the know when we publish new episodes. Likewise, please provide me with feedback. What do you like? What do you dislike? And what else would you like to know? And now, today's show.
Okay, today on Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders, I have two fellow travelers, adventurers. We've been on a little bit of an exploration in recent years. And through this activity, through this organization called the Collegiate Leadership Competition. And so today I have two board members. We're talking with Bela, we're talking with Dan, and we're talking and reflecting on some of our experiences of coaching leadership, practicing leadership. What does a leadership competition even look like? What is that? And ultimately, this was an organization that was co-founded with really kind of one express purpose, which was to create a practice field for leadership development. So that's what we are going to reflect on today. We're going to share what we've learned. Bela has served as executive director of the CLC, and Dan, I almost read Dan Jenkins, has served as a coach, and he's won the competition a couple times as coach. He's kind of a champion coach out there for leadership competitions. So to the two of you, welcome. Thanks for being here. Bela, would you say a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast today. You know, we've been, as Scott said, we've been building this competition for the last 5 or 6 years. It's been a really interesting adventure, and as Scott mentioned, I've been the executive director of CLC. It's been a really interesting 5 or 6 years where we've been building a new type of experience in leadership education. And I'm really excited to chat about this with the both of you today.
Yeah, and Dan, tell us a little bit about you, sir.
Sure, Scott. Yeah, so it's great to be back on the show for something else. And so I'm chair and associate professor of leadership and organizational studies at the University of Southern Maine. And I remember the conversation quite well, going either up or down the escalator at a International Leadership Association conference. I want to say it was 2012 or 2014 at the latest. And you were talking about some type of leadership Olympics. It sounded like a good idea. What would that look like? And I was sold at that point and was excited to be able to bring a van load of students over from Maine to Ohio to participate in that first one that included more than 2 schools there in 2016, and just to fell in love with the idea of leadership as a competition and as a field of competition, not only because of the competitive spirit, but also what it takes to prepare students to work in teams and learn how to give feedback to each other. And no, it's exciting, and I'm excited to share a little bit about some of the experiences and everything that I love about this organization and this experience for students.
Well, and what's really kind of interesting is this whole thing was founded out of the work of one of our guests, K. Anders Ericsson. He's now passed away, but really his work around deliberate practice. And Arthur Schwartz and I were having a conversation. I think we were in San Diego, and we first just decided, okay, let's try this. And really, how do we create a space where we can engage in deliberate practice? And a very, very simplistic definition of that is that a learner, it doesn't matter what domain. Anders Ericsson, he wrote a book called Peak. We'll put it in the show notes. Please read this book. But he said, look, deliberate practice, in a nutshell, it's time, repetition, real-time coaching and feedback, and working on skills outside of your current ability level. And so much of leadership development is people sitting in a room talking about it, or people in an organization practicing it, but there's no middle ground where we get real-time coaching and feedback, where we get opportunities to work on skills outside of our current ability level. And that's really what we've been exploring. So I think from maybe each of you, what are a couple things, and we could kind of go back and forth a little bit, but what are a couple observations you've had? We're about 5.5 years into this little experiment. What are some observations you've had about this whole notion of coaching leadership, a leadership competition, a deliberate practice. What have you seen? What are some themes that stand out for you?
I think that first of all, it works somehow, some way. I think maybe it was a surprise, in some forms, just how responsive students were to this idea, because it was a brand new endeavor. We entered into a domain that hadn't been explored before. I mean, certainly teams compete, but they compete with more of a very structured, sport. There's points, there's scores, there's rule books and things of that nature. So much of this was organic and was based on a pathway of continuous improvement and getting feedback from students, getting feedback from coaches. And what I've definitely found is, it's in addition to building these skills, it's spending time developing students in how to work with each other and how to build relationships with one another. And any time that, as a coach of students, and I've had students that have, they've ranged from 18 to 68. I've had undergrad and grad students working together, students in different majors and minors and you name it. And it doesn't make a difference as long as you focus on, what does it take to get these folks to talk to each other, to develop their communication skills, to trust each other. And then I would say that, the foundational elements of the competition, which are extremely important because it provides this common language around leadership and followership and groups and teams and setting goals and giving feedback. And those are all essential. It's this special recipe of using that as a foundational, springboard for entering into a trusted team relationship that develops, whether students have met each other before or had never seen each other on this earth prior. Taking them through these developmental stages, you can just see how excited they get when they're able to perform as a high performing team by the time they get to the competition.
Exactly. And so, Bela, maybe share a little bit about, because you served as executive director of this organization. You took this huge leap and said, yes, I will help build this organization. And this organization is where it is because of you. Tell listeners a little bit about how it's structured. And then maybe what are some observations you've had as you've kind of been so integral in the development of this organization?
Absolutely. So as the two of you know, our structure has changed a little bit in this past year because we're in the midst of a pandemic and a lot of things around us are currently changing. So this year we're using a more virtual approach, and we are doing our best to design an experience where students can get together in a safe way and still practice leadership. But the foundations of the program really remain the same. So, there's this element of practice that you talked about, Scott. And what Dan talked about is that this is a fun experience. And so what I think we've created, while it's certainly very complex and there are a lot of nuances, but it's a fun way to learn leadership. I remember being a grad student, I got involved in this organization while I was serving as a graduate assistant working under Scott. And I remember learning about leadership as a student. And so, you learn about the scholars, you read the books, you have these examples of what good leadership looks like. And you think, I'm a good leader or I'm an okay leader. There's some students that think they're bad leaders going into this. But wherever a student really thinks they are at the beginning of this experience tends to change a lot as they go through the program. And I think it's because of the fun that they're having. So they're exploring leadership in a different way. It's not like I'm reading this textbook, I'm memorizing these definitions and taking a test. It's more about your ability to actually apply these concepts and to see them in real time around you while you're having a good time learning more about yourself and building these meaningful relationships with your peers. So I think, there's a lot that stands out to me about this program, but one thing that really is top of mind when I think about CLC is that it's a really untraditional approach. And throughout the years, as we've seen hundreds of students graduate from this program, we've also come to realize that it's an approach to leadership that's very well received. A lot of students leave comments each year saying that this is arguably one of the best leadership experiences that they've had, both because they learned so much about themselves, but also because they enjoyed the process of really discovering more about who they are.
And Dan, we both know, Bela, you've seen this as well. I've seen it this week. there's literally a chasm between people knowing the content and actually being able to apply the content. I mean, it's a chasm. It takes so much training to really help a human being go from knowing a problem-solving model, well, we're going to set roles, we're going to outline the problem, we're going to list multiple strategies, and they can regurgitate that to you. But as soon as you put them into an activity, training the individuals to really use that by default as the default behavior, it's incredibly difficult. That chasm is huge. Wouldn't you say, Dan?
Yeah, without a doubt, and to see those light bulbs go off where students start to make that connection of, oh, like those things that we were talking about, or that article that you had us read, or those terms that you had us memorize. Like now we see these in action as we're trying to solve this complex problem, or figure out this puzzle, or beat the other team that we're practicing with, or what have you, because it is about communication. It's about problem solving strategies. It's about making sure that you're being open to not only the feedback, but also the contributions of everybody, within your group and in your small team, and being able to manage that and facilitate that as a leader, whether conflict arises or whether you're kind of designated as the leader, which is always one of my favorite things about the experience, is that the actual, the role of the leader shifts, from activity to activity, but it's just so experiential. It's such an engaging process. And when, we're able to find that intersect between theory and the practice, that's where this is just a magical experience for students. And watching it as a coach and as a professor of leadership, it's just so rewarding.
Well, and Bela, so the competition, that shifts things as well, right? When you put people in a room and there's an actual competitive atmosphere, that shifts the students, that shifts the coaches, that shifts the whole dynamic. So talk a little bit about the element of competition.
The element of competition is something we are exploring this even this year. We're learning more and more both about the students and the coaches that are involved, and how competitive experiences, they change all of us, and we all behave a little bit differently in these types of environments. So to provide a little bit of context for folks that don't know a lot about CLC is more than just a competition. And I promise to get back to your question here, Scott. The way that the program works is we have different members that are parts of higher education kind of reach out to CLC, or we're reaching out to them during the summer months. They sign up for the program. Our coaches then are either student affairs professionals or professors at different colleges and universities across the US, Canada, and now really around the world, that get familiar with our program during the fall. They go through a series of trainings. And then in the spring, when their students are back for the spring semester, they start what we call at CLC a practice season. During the CLC practice season, students learn about 10 terms that are part of our curriculum. And these terms cover ideas like creative problem solving, effective communication, followership styles, leadership styles, and so on. And as the students become more and more familiar with these different terms and concepts, their coaches begin introducing experiential exercises where the students have to work as a team to accomplish a series of different goals. And all of this leads up to the competition that we host once a year, where we then get into some of these exciting kind of competitive experiences that Scott was talking about here earlier. And really throughout the years, we've seen students get really excited to be in our competition arenas. This year, that will be a virtual experience. But there's an element of pride when the students are at these events. They're really trying to put their best foot forward. They're trying to impress judges. They're trying to impress their peers, their coaches. And sometimes that can be really exciting. And sometimes also we all get carried away a little bit in the moment. And we can forget that we're there to practice leadership. And it really becomes a little bit more like a sport, right? Where we're just there for the win. But I guess that sheds a little bit of light on human nature, and that's a whole different topic.
Well, and Arthur Schwartz, the co-founder, said it really well. He said, well, why do people practice? People practice to compete or to perform, right? To perform the cello or to play the game. And this is really an opportunity, and it's an excuse. It's an excuse to have people practice leadership. And what happens is really, really cool, Dan, because essentially your team of 6 students becomes a case study for all of the curriculum, right? I mean, you've seen this. You can go to a case competition where it's kind of this fictitious case that you're analyzing, staying in your cognitive, kind of that cognitive domain. But in this experiential learning, they become the case study. They're experiencing the stressors. They're navigating their leadership styles. They're following with greater intentionality. So your team becomes the case, don't you think, Dan?
Yeah, it's case in point. That it's. I think it's a great, perhaps, maybe maybe an extension of that method, because it is, you think about some of these great, teaching and learning activities that you can do in organizational behavior and organizational theory classes of, like, the classroom is the organization. Like, these students are able to not only interact with and, within and among each other, but also every single time we do some type of learning activity or experience, we debrief that. And so they're given that opportunity to use, Heifetz's language, to get up on the balcony and take a look, down at the dance floor and do some, analysis and some critical reflection of, like, hey, Scott, when you said this, it had me, I stumbled for a sec, and, I wasn't sure how to react, and, I probably could have approached that differently, but, then Bela, stepped in and softened things out, and we were able to move forward and continue solving the challenge. And, it's these types of things that it helps them to immediately, like, as you said, to reinforce this deliberate practice of, they're able to perform, get feedback immediately, not only from one another, but from, these coaches that are in, roles of leadership or have experience with leadership training and development and education. And it reinforces that loop. And, it is really fascinating as a coach to observe this, like you said, this case study, evolve throughout the course of a semester, or if you would kind of think of the training period that basically parallels the first half or 2/3 of a semester in higher education.
It was hilarious. Bela, you had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that we've had some shifts. Literally last spring, we became the case study because what worked and what we had created and built over 4 or 5 years needed to be shifted quickly. Talk a little bit about that. How has the curriculum even shaped, well, your own experiences? Because now you're a business owner. You are using this curriculum each and every day as a person who led an organization. How does it inform your current work, Bela?
That's a great question. And, the short answer is in many ways. The long answer is that I grew to truly love CLC as an organization, everything that it represents. And a lot of what we teach through this program has become part of my everyday life. And so, it's funny, even when I joke with my husband, he now knows a ton of the CLC curriculum because, I've been involved in this for so long. And so we'll be at home and kind of solving a problem. He's like, wait, are we solving? Did we, outline the problem, which is a CLC concept for listeners who don't know. I have talked to so many students throughout the years that have said, I continue to use the CLC terms and concepts in my everyday life. And when we initially started this program, we had this kind of test pool of 12 or so students that were the first ever CLC participants. I've kept in touch with many of them over the last 5 or 6 years, and a majority of them continue to reflect on this experience and mention how powerful it was to them. For me, I think CLC has helped in every business that I've been a part of after, being with the organization. And so I'm constantly thinking through, what kind of follower is this person that I'm working with, or what kind of leader is this? And I'm always filtering these everyday type situations through the curriculum. So I think that this is a powerful experience for people at really any level. I mean, one of the cool things that the 3 of us have explored is that we've used this curriculum with individuals as young as 17 or 18 years old. We've actually as young as 8th graders. Yeah, we did some retreats with middle school students. And you all have used this material in your consulting work as well. And, those are people that are mid-career or senior career levels. So this is truly, I believe, a body of work that can be adapted to so many different arenas and can be, in fact, impactful to a person at any point in their life. In terms of us as the case study, I mean, last year, about almost a year ago exactly, we were thinking that the competition was going to happen in 2020. And so over the course of about 7 days, I think collectively we experienced aspects of all 10 of the CLC terms that are part of the program.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of case studies, we were right on the cusp of trying to make this decision of whether we, go forward with trying to host an in-person, competition. Again, we're somewhere almost exactly like you said, about almost 12 months to the day of where we were, kind of deep in it. And I remember bringing some of all the information we had at the time and actually brought it to my students as a case study, as a challenge for them to work through, to kind of let them say, like, hey, this is a real leadership challenge that we're dealing with. Like, we have this pandemic. We don't know. Here's what we know so far. I mean, imagine where we were a year ago about the information that we had available to us and how much of a threat was it going to be in Portland, Maine versus some of the other parts of the country and what have you. And luckily the students, even though they didn't want to, they came to a similar conclusion of there's no way that we can safely, facilitate this for students from multiple institutions, et cetera, to create a competition that would, just to go back to that, just to be safe, and so they experienced rapid change, quick change, and we were able to make a meaningful experience for them. But we also learned a lot as an organization. And I feel that, when we're so excited for what this 2021 digital and virtual approach to the CLC is going to be.
And the digital leader development is a completely 100% new domain. I mean, the coaches who have come along on this little adventure of, can we develop leadership digitally? Can we develop teams with, 6 people, some of whom are in China, some of whom are in India, some are in Canada, some are in the US, really all over the world. And can we still do this? Can we still do this work? And at the end of it, really feel like we've built team? Of course, organizations are doing that. Can we? And can we build that same culture around the experience? And I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how it plays out, because none of us on this podcast right now know what the story is going to be. We're going to know more in about a month, literally a month and 2 days. We're going to have a lot of data, but we're exploring and we're trying to see what we can learn. And again, the coaches and the students who've come along in this 2021 competition just need to be commended, because they are a part of this experiment that, it's to be written, right?
And I think that this year reminds me a lot of year 1 and 2 of CLC. Back in 2014, 2015, when we were really just piloting this project and trying to learn more about what this would look like, the 3 of us were designing an experience that we had never been a part of before, because something like this, we didn't come across any examples of leadership competitions that are formatted in the way that CLC is. And so we were designing something totally new that hadn't been explored before. And there was a lot of learning in that process. We certainly didn't make all the right decisions right away. We made plenty of mistakes that we had the opportunity to learn from as we moved into the future. And this year is very much reminiscent of that. And I think that we will continue to do a lot of learning. There's a lot that we know now about how you can teach leadership in these different experiential ways, how you can design competitive experiences that are fun but impactful. But I think that this new format for us, this digital environment, is certainly going to bring some new challenges, but also a lot of learning that will help us make CLC even stronger.
Dan, in year 2, I actually think it was year 2, our mission statement was something to the effect of, and Bela, you'll remember this, it was like, taking students to the edge of their knowledge, the boundaries of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I think year 3, we changed that to say taking students and coaches to the edge of their knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so as we kind of wind down, Dan, what are a couple of things you've learned about yourself through this process as a coach? Does anything come to mind for you about reflections about what even you've learned about yourself? Because this isn't easy from a coach's perspective either. You care about these students. You want them to do well. You want them to, like I said, kind of cross that chasm of theory to practice. What have you observed in yourself? What have you learned?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that comes to mind is to focus on relationships, and just how important that is to not only model that for the students, but to make sure that you're providing ample time in the team development and the group development and the practices, focusing on that, getting students to share with each other, learn about each other. Because what is good leadership? Leadership's about relationships. It's an influence relationship. You can't, while there are as many definitions for leadership as there are flavors of coffee. Yeah, innovation or flavors of coffee. The one thing that I think is a constant is it is some type of relationship between individuals, whether it be leaders, followers, and contexts or what have you. But any time that where we might have had a snow day or we had to rearrange something because a student couldn't attend a practice or something, and I decided to add another more of a skills-based activity versus a team building activity or some type of trust building or communication or feedback type of activity, the team either regressed or just kind of became stagnant, and as soon as we returned to these relationship building types of activities, things started moving in an extremely quick rate. And I'll just share a 30-second story where we had a returning team member from one of our championship teams come and visit students to give some feedback, a year later or 2 years later. And he saw how this group was kind of performing, and he pulled me aside and said, hey, I guess they're kind of still in the norming stages, huh, Dan? And I was like, oh man, that hurts, because the reason it hurt is because I thought they were a little farther along, but I had done exactly what I had shared. Is I had, because a student couldn't attend a class on a certain day, I had focused more on skills versus relationship building activities, and immediately changed the agenda for the rest of that class meeting and the following meeting. That same coach, our former student, came back a little bit later in the semester, and much to my surprise, or I guess positively, said, hey, they've definitely progressed in a way that you should be proud of, and they're performing on all cylinders now. So yeah, that's definitely the big one.
Lots of learning, a lot of learning, on all ends. Couple final thoughts from each one of you, and then we'll close out. When this has been a wonderful opportunity to build relationships with students and see them work in somewhat semi-stressful situations at times, build relationships with other educators around North America. That's been a wonderful piece of all of this, and creating a little bit of a community of educators. I've built some incredible relationships with people like Chris Gerhardt in Canada, who this provided us an excuse to get together on a more consistent basis and really explore this whole topic. And so I think that's been a wonderful byproduct, at least for me, of this whole experience, is driving with Steve Edelson up to Canada for a competition. Now, for any listeners, we're not doing that anymore. It's all virtual this year. But the opportunity to build those relationships is just invaluable and to explore. Bela, how about you?
Well, to tie into what you just said, I think it's been fascinating seeing so many educators come together and try to make our program even stronger. There are a lot of people. We've talked to hundreds of people about CLC, and so many of them have been impressed by our work and excited to join. And then when they do, their thoughts help to make this organization better. I mean, we have so many volunteers, people who are coaches, part of this program, who spend hours and hours reviewing some of our work, providing feedback, and they're truly helping us make strides. And so it's been really wonderful to see great leadership, as part of a organization that focuses on leadership. And so, I just like to thank all of the people outside of the board and the staff that have really helped make CLC what it is, because so many of those people exude what it is that we're trying to teach through this program.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I mean, the relationships are just out of this world, and being able to, again, pre-COVID, to be able to travel to different universities and support the organization, as a board member, and provide hosting or logistics or running some of the competitions and things like that, are just so rewarding because you see the impact that it makes on the students and the coaches and all of those folks involved and the volunteers. And I would say the only thing I would leave you all with would be just that the ability because of the folks that are involved, the ability for the organization to evolve and adapt to where we are now. Because developing leaders digitally, how does that work? But guess what? It's happening all over the globe. And so, we created an experience that was, pre-digital, and now we're able to adapt and offer a digital experience because folks are meeting. Folks have to do teamwork. They got to do group work. They got to meet deadlines and finish projects and make amazing things happen for the visions and missions of their organizations. And we're teaching the next generation of leaders how to do that.
I was just going to say, we've talked a lot in this podcast about this being a meaningful experience for students and, designing these competitive experiences. But one thing that we haven't touched on that's really important is that we're also doing research along the way to validate our results. So for all of you that are super data driven out there, I'd love to invite you to read a little bit about our work and to just know that, we're not just kind of making this up as we go. There's a lot of reliability and validity behind the scenes in terms of this program as well. And the more people that are involved, the better the end becomes. So
yes, we're trying to. Dave Rush is helping us really think through some of that work that we're doing, which has been wonderful to partner with him as well. So, there's a community of people, of students, of educators, of volunteers who are experimenting with doing leadership development a little bit differently, leadership education, leadership learning in a different way. And it's been a fun adventure. By no means is it a finished adventure. And I think that's part of the fun. That's part of what keeps us engaged, keeps us involved, is that this is, I've said it many times on this podcast, leadership is a beautiful puzzle. Leadership development is a beautiful puzzle. And this is one opportunity to create a little bit of a laboratory where we can learn more. So to the two of you, thanks for all you do. Definitely appreciate it. And we will kind of wind down there for the night. Bela, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. It was a pleasure.
Dan Jenkins, thank you, sir.
You're welcome, man. My pleasure.
Okay. Be well, everybody.
On April 10th, 2021, we are hosting the 2021 championships for the Collegiate Leadership Competition. As we discussed in the podcast, it's a completely digital event, 300 plus people, coaches, judges, participants gathering together. All this week, we're going to be releasing podcasts about that experience and about the experience of the Collegiate Leadership Competition, just to provide a number of different perspectives on what we are up to. As always, thanks for listening in. Take care, everybody, and be well. You have been listening to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share it with others and let them know what we're up to. And one last quick reminder to click subscribe so you know when we publish new episodes. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can stay in touch with me by visiting www.scottjallen.net or any number of social media platforms. Be well, be safe, and make a difference wherever you are on this beautiful planet. And now, here's Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.